It was always a special treat when we visited Grandma and Grandpa's house. Their old creaky home had a charm to it, that musty, warm scent that you couldn't quite place. I loved staying in their guest room with its floral bedspread and antique furniture, but there was always one thing that made me uneasy: the lullaby. At night, when we were supposed to be asleep, I would hear it, a soft, haunting melody drifting through the walls. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't even a radio. It was the lullaby Grandma used to hum when I was a baby. The one that always made me feel safe. The one I thought was long forgotten. The first time I heard it, I was 12. I got out of bed thinking it was Grandma singing, but as I walked down the hall, the melody seemed to float further away, as though moving on its own. I tiptoed towards the stairs, but something made me freeze. There, at the bottom, was Grandma, sitting in her rocking chair humming the lullaby, but her eyes were empty, hollow. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I crept closer, and that's when I saw it. Grandpa was standing in the doorway behind her, his eyes locked on me. But they weren't his eyes, they were black, soulless pits. He didn't speak, but I could feel his presence pressing against me, like something was pulling me towards them. The lullaby stopped. Grandma turned slowly, her face twisted in a way I'd never seen before. "It's time to come back," she whispered. Before I could run, I felt hands grab my ankles, cold and tight, pulling me towards the stairs. I screamed, but no one came. I finally broke free and slammed the door to the guest room, but when I looked out the window, they were standing outside, watching me. Just watching, swaying to the lullaby. That night, I heard the lullaby again, but this time it didn't stop. When I was little, I spent summers with my grandparents on their farm. Their house was ancient, filled with old dusty furniture and relics from the past. I always loved exploring their attic, where they kept all sorts of strange, forgotten treasures. But there was one thing I was told never to touch: the old mirror. It was massive, framed in a tarnished silver with intricate engravings that twisted into odd, almost decipherable patterns. It hung on the wall facing a dusty corner, and I'd often find myself staring at it when I wandered up there. Grandma always told me to stay away, that it was just an heirloom and nothing more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more than just a mirror. One evening, I was alone in the attic, my curiosity getting the better of me. I stood in front of the mirror, feeling an odd pull toward it. My reflection seemed to blur, flicker, like a bad television signal. And then I saw it. Behind me in the mirror was my grandmother. But she wasn't in the room with me. She was standing on the other side of the glass, her face twisted into something not quite human. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the gentle smile I knew. It was wide, stretching her face unnaturally. "Come closer," she whispered, her voice muffled, as if she were calling me from the underwater. I backed away, but the image of her kept smiling, never breaking eye contact. I ran downstairs, heart pounding, and burst into the living room. Grandma was sitting in her rocking chair, knitting peacefully, just as she always did. But something was wrong. Her eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. Slowly, she raised her head, her face slowly morphing into the same grotesque smile I had seen in the attic. "Don't worry, dear," she said, her voice softer, almost comforting. "I'm always with you." I turned to run, but as I reached the door, I felt something cold and sharp brush against my neck. The last thing I heard was Grandma's voice, now coming from behind me. "You'll never leave." When I woke up the next morning, I was back in my bed. I ran to the attic, but the mirror was gone, replaced with a small, faded photo of my grandparents from their youth. I never saw the mirror again, but sometimes in the reflection of my own eyes, I still see her smile.